Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. Happy Friday, everyone. We have a great show for you. Obviously, we had the big election on Monday night. Thank you, everyone who tuned into our live broadcast. Our goal was to replace the CBC. We didn't quite get there, but we had a fantastic night. Great guests, great insight. We had a decision desk making the live calls, so we really appreciate everyone who joined us. Because the election went so late, our broadcast ended at 2 a.m., not all of the dust had sort of settled. So we're going to do a recap today of the election and talk about who I think are the biggest winners and the biggest losers of the campaign. There were a lot of losers, and we're going to go through them all. Before we get going, I'm just going to ask you to quickly like the video. It really helps us with the YouTube algorithm. Just takes a second of your time, and it really helps us out. Thank you so much. Okay, to join me on this episode, we're going to have a lot of fun today on the Candice Malcolm Show, and I am pleased to be joined by one of my favorite political commentators, Wyatt Claypool. He is the founder of the National Telegraph and a political commentator based in Calgary. Wyatt, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so let's just go through the final count. We have this is as of Friday morning. I think most of the votes are in, but there will be, of course, a few recounts. So the way that it all finished is that the Liberal Party of Canada is sitting at 168 seats. They got 8.5 million votes. 43.7% total. And then next we have the Conservatives, 144 seats, 8,089,000 votes, which represents 41.3%. The NDP had 7 seats, 1.2 million, which was 6.3 seats. Interestingly, the Bloc also had 6.3% of the vote, but they have a much more efficient breakdown because they only run candidates in one province in Quebec. So they got 23 seats for their 1.2 million. Green Party effectively got wiped out in this election. 1 seat for their crazy leader, Elizabeth May, and 1.3% of the vote, 240,000 and change votes. And the PPC also got wiped out. 0 seats, only 140,000 votes. 0.7% of the campaign. Interestingly, there was a flip. So the Liberals lost a closely contested seat to the Bloc Québécois after vote validation. I think it ended up switching by like 70 votes, which is enough to switch it over. So sometimes in democracy, it really comes down, like every single vote matters. This election was so close. It was really won just in a handful of seats across the country. Remember, the magic number to get a majority is 172. Liberals finished at 168. It looks like I think there'll be a handful of recounts, but my guess is it'll roughly stay the same at 168. And so, Wyatt, I know that there's been some speculation about this idea that all the Liberals would have to do is convince 4 NDP or 4 Green or 4 Bloc members, or not Green, 1 Bloc, 4 Greens to just cross the floor and come on over to the Liberals. I think that's highly unlikely because just as you may say you can find 4 people from other parties to cross the floor to the Liberals, you could also very easily have 4 Liberals be convinced to cross the floor to the Conservatives to spoil it for Mark Carney and be given, a special position in the Conservative Party. It goes both ways. We've seen that happen before. So I don't see any pathway to Mark Carney magically coming up with a majority here. What do you think?
Well, you're right. It's an arbitrary argument that, well, look, they only need 5 seats, so why don't 5 NDP MPs move over so then they can fill the speaker position and they can have their full majority without having to tie-break votes? It's like, okay, but, and I've said this in many shows before, there's a reason why the Liberal Party and the NDP are different parties. It's not just because they just decided they like the color orange better. Jagmeet Singh had very much obscured the differences between the Liberals and the NDP, but like what many NDP MPs have said, they're not crossing the floor, and I think that they'd be fools to not see what the party is going to be like once they pick a new leader. They have been through 3 cycles with the same guy. At least give someone else a chance for a bit. And if they're smart, they'll actually try and re-embrace the blue-collar labor vote they used to have back in the day. And they'll probably treat this minority government more like Jack Layton treated the 2004 Paul Martin minority government. Because back then, Jack Layton understood, even though, yes, the Liberals are more like them than they are the Conservatives, that he needed to be able to pull the plug if he was actually going to be able to gain more political power. Jagmeet Singh lost because he had no red line that he was willing, if crossed, to pull the plug on Justin Trudeau and just let him sink.
Well, and we know he came out the week of the campaign and basically just said we purposefully propped up the Liberal government even though we didn't agree with it because we were just dead set against Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives winning a majority, which is totally counter to any type of principle or even good strategic management of a political party. Okay, I want to move on to talk about the PPC vote split. There was a lot of comments and concern over this. So from our count here at Juno News, we found that there were 3 seats where the PPC vote was the difference. So Brampton East, you can see here that the Liberals got 23,600 votes, the Conservatives got 21,600 votes, so the difference was fewer than 2,000, and the PPC came in right there with 2,300, enough to spoil it. One riding over in Brampton, North Caledon, you had the Liberals with 22,600, the Conservatives with 22,000 and change, and the PPCs with 600 votes. Again, that's the difference, more than the difference right there. Finally, just a little bit further over in Kitchener-Costoga, the Liberals won with 30,000, the Conservatives 29,000, almost 500 basically, and the PPCs with 700. So such small margins and such a small number from the PPC. I don't know for sure that every single PPC member, every single PPC voter, is also a Conservative voter. I think that a lot of people who go to the PPC are just protesting the system. They're protesting the 2 parties. They are anti-establishment. And so I don't know that those were easily you could easily turn those people into Conservative voters when it's such a small number, but at the same time, obviously, it's frustrating to Conservatives to see just those 3 seats. Obviously, 3 seats won't make a difference. Like we talked about, the Liberals did win by enough to have more of a comfortable minority, but still, every seat does matter. So what do you make of this line of arguing?
I would sort of probably split those 2 areas into 2 different situations with the PPC. In Brampton, the situation wasn't so much that, oh, don't they know that they should be voting for the Conservatives in order to stop the Liberals? They should be trying to get rid of the Liberal government. They're obviously like super corrupt. The problem is that in Brampton East, the PPC candidate Jeff Lall had tried to contest one of the riding's Conservative Party nominations and was arbitrarily kicked out. And so it was less that he was running for the PPC because he liked the PPC, and more so that he was looking for an easy political vehicle to go after the party after having removed him as a candidate. And he ended up having a few other Hindu Canadians join him in running for the PPC in the Brampton area, out of protest. People can agree with it. They can not agree with it. They can say maybe he should suck it up and just get over it. It's just, that's politics at the end of the day, that if you end up messing with the wrong person, they may not just go home and feel sad about it. They may do something about it. And then in Kitchener-Conestoga, this is more of, I would say, a lot of PPC guys, and I even voted PPC in 2021. I couldn't possibly vote O'Toole, and I'm in a safe Conservative riding. But the people who are left over, I would say, are very much like the Green Party. They are too anti-establishment to vote for any mainstream party, and they will never come over because their actual list of demands will shift just so that they can keep saying that they're a little bit too pure for the Conservative Party. I made a video at one point where I had gone over some of the issues that PPC people were having, some of the candidates, on why you should vote for them, not the Conservative. It was easily debunkable that they were saying, well, Poilievre has never stood up against gender theory. Well, Poilievre has never stood up against lockdowns or mandates. He never did like this or that. It's like, you can just easily verify he did. But these people, even if you ended up showing them that he did, it's still not good enough, because that's not the point of the party to actually get some principled policy position. It's to be better than the Conservatives.
No, that's absolutely right. And I think that the idea is that you always vote for the most conservative candidate that can win, right? And I like Maxime Bernier. I think I didn't vote in the leadership contest because I'm not a Conservative Party member, but I would have been happy if Maxime Bernier had won the leadership of the party after Stephen Harper stepped down. I thought he was really good on cultural issues, really good on economic issues like supply management. He barely lost the leadership race to Andrew Scheer, right? And it seemed like he could have had a great future in the party. He decided to leave. And I get the protest, right? I understand in 2019 why you might have voted for Maxime Bernier to protest against the Conservative Party going too soft, specifically on immigration, refusing to talk about it. In 2021, definitely the COVID issue was madness. Like, I'll tell you, Wyatt, watching the 2021 debate, all candidates debate with the leaders, and seeing that ridiculous propaganda video that they all put out promoting the vaccine, speaking in unison, speaking like honestly, like it was creepy. And to have the conservative do that, like the whole idea of a conservative is our values are different and they articulate the differences and they don't just succumb to the liberal narrative. So seeing a leader succumb to the liberal narrative, I'm all for it. I'm all for in 2021 voting for the People's Party. But this time around, I just didn't see the imperative. I didn't see the push. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna. I hated that stupid "we're all in this together" video. I don't know. There's never a moment where speaking in unison isn't creepy, or as if it's gonna put people at ease because all these people are reading a script. But yeah, the PPC now they're basically a dead party. The only thing I find annoying because the thing is I don't even not support small parties. I flew on my own expense to Ontario in February just to hit doors for the new Blue Party of Ontario because I don't think that Doug Ford is a good premier and I don't think the PC party is doing anything conservative. So you should be trying to prop up an alternative. The problem is my problem with the PPC, and this is a problem with all the elections, they don't even try. That's the problem. I don't like when people take small donor money and they basically just burn it on pretending like they're going to be standing up to the system or something like that.
I completely agree with that. We'll get to more. Okay, I want to get to the biggest winners and the biggest losers in the election. We'll get to a little bit more on Maxime Bernier in that. First, I want to start with the winners. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to lie to the audience. I will say the biggest winner of the election was Mark Carney and the Liberals. They pulled off something absolutely remarkable. It was spectacular, the reversal in fortunes that we saw in this country. Mark Carney took a party that was down and out. There was a certain point at the early part of 2025 where the NDP was actually polling ahead of Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. It was possible that the Liberals were going to get wiped out. Mark Carney showed up and managed to do something that just rarely happens in politics, a total reversal of fortune. He had the legacy media working in overdrive for him. They crafted the perfect narrative. It was, I've said it before on the show, it was like a black swan event where you had Donald Trump making these ridiculous comments, Canadians getting really worried about the literal annexation or the effects of trade wars, Mark Carney coming in as this sort of stable, competent, middle-of-the-road banker. We know that that isn't true, but so many Canadians fell for it, and you have to hand it to them for being just so manipulative and so good at it. It's like they're so good at being evil, and they pulled it off. Unbelievable. I think more winners in this election were certainly independent media, independent citizen journalists, content creators, podcasters. You saw a whole new class of individuals. So many of them we had on our show, but they were there breaking it down, getting huge numbers on platforms like YouTube, TikTok, X. I mean, there's like 20 or 25. And for me, I've been doing this independent media gig for the last, I think, 4 elections, 2015, 2019, 2021, and 2024, 2025. This was the first one where I really felt like I just had good company. There were so many people around saying the same kind of thing, doing the same kind of thing. It didn't feel so lonely. I think in previous elections, it was just like True North and the Rebel basically fighting against everyone. And this time it felt like there was more of a critical mass. Obviously, we didn't have enough to push it over for the good side, for the Conservatives. But I think that the future is being laid out in front of us. I think that the legacy media really have lost their grip. And I hope and I pray that this was the last election that they were actually able to set the narrative. Because yes, we put cracks in the narrative. They still said it though. And so I think, yes, we were the winners, but the legacy media still had their day. Just a few more winners election. I think new Conservative MPs. I'm very excited about a handful of freshmen or first-time elected MPs. People like Andrew Lawton, who we had on the show yesterday, former True North journalist. Matt Strauss, who was an incredible fighter for the just fighting against the madness and groupthink during COVID. He was elected. Aaron Gunn, documentary filmmaker and independent journalist out in British Columbia, was elected, and David Bexty, Cian Bexty's father, was elected. So there's a whole slate of new Conservative candidates that I am very excited about. Final winner for me was Danielle Smith, and for the future of Alberta. She just came across as being so strong, so confident in her views, really speaking differently than the crowd and being able to articulate herself. And I think that the movements, the strategy that she's had post-election, changing the citizenship initiative, referendum requirements, and coming out demanding a reset in the relationship with Ottawa, I think Danielle Smith definitely came out as a big winner of the campaign. Okay, Wyatt, what did you think of my winners list, and do you have your own?
I thought especially the one about independent media is good, not just because I work in independent media, not we don't exist just to gas each other up. But it's genuinely, you're right. Back in the last election, there wasn't really a big collection of people covering the news. It was, yeah, just a few collections of networks, a few niche YouTubers, and that was it. I'm going to add another winner to your list, and it hurts me to say it, but a big winner of the night was Bruce Fanjoy, a man who had been mocked for probably 2 years trying to take on Pierre Poilievre in Carleton. And was he helped by a big boundary redistribution? Yes. Was he helped by the fact that Pierre Poilievre really didn't have time to run his own riding? Yes. But if you win the seat, you still get the credit for it. But I will even add that the Conservative Party still had a good night. There were certain areas you could say that the Southwestern Ontario Conservatives did really, really well. We won Windsor West and both Windsor ridings, despite some of those not having gone Conservative since 1935, I believe. And so there are a lot of good highlights around the country for the Conservatives. The fact that the Conservatives' vote has actually become far more efficient than it was in previous elections. In previous elections, they could win the popular vote and still come in with only 119 seats. And now you can actually lose the popular vote, and you can come in nearly almost at what the Liberals had. If 1 point just shifted from the Liberals to the Conservatives, it may be a completely different election. And I think you're right, where the thing that the legacy media did and Mark Carney had done, yes, they won the night, so they get the credit still. At the same time, it's one of those tricks you can only pull once. And my evidence is Chinese interference in this election did not go very well. The CCP had no effect. Chinese Canadians voted Conservative by quite a large margin, because you can't pull the same trick twice. In 2021, they scared Chinese Canadians into thinking the Conservatives blame you for COVID because you're Chinese, which was ridiculous. But if you live potentially in a small media bubble of mostly listening to a few Chinese publications sent to you over WeChat, you may be influenced. This election, it didn't matter what they did, it just did not work. Chinese Canadians didn't want to hear it, and they were just going to vote for whoever was going to perform well on drugs, crime, and taxes.
Absolutely. And we can go through some of the ridings that have a high Chinese population, like Markham Unionville, like the Richmond ridings out in British Columbia that did go Conservative. So again, yeah, I did an entire show on Tuesday of the good news from the election. And I did think that the Conservatives overperformed. They picked up a lot. I mean, I was going through some of the ridings, Wyatt, in the 905, like Richmond Hill, the Vaughan ridings. I mean, they were winning with like rural Alberta number. Now, I know David Bexley got elected with over 80%, so there was no riding in Ontario where Conservative got more than 80%. But, I mean, Melissa Lantsman won with a higher percentage in Thornhill, which is basically Toronto, than Michelle Rempel did in Calgary. In Vaughan, King Vaughan, 62%. So, big numbers for the Conservative, very close to Toronto. So I do think that there is some good news. Okay, let's go through the losers. Everybody wants to know who are our biggest losers of the election. Number one, by far and away, the absolute biggest loser in the election, probably the biggest loser in Canadian political history. That award is going to go to Jagmeet Singh and the NDP. Absolutely wiped out, losing party status. Jagmeet Singh loses his own riding, will go down in history as a laughing stock and a total joke who enabled the worst government in Canadian history. And I want you to get a load of this, Wyatt, because I noticed this from an individual named Brett Cameron on X. He posted this. He writes, the number of campaigns that failed to get 10% of the vote, thereby not qualifying for a juicy Elections Canada rebate check to repay bank loans and replenish the local war chest. You can look at this chart. First of all, it is so absurd that taxpayers subsidize political parties in this country. I mean, this is so ridiculous that the Elections Canada gives you a rebate check for the amount of money that you spend on the campaign if you hit a certain threshold. It's just silly. But anyways, I disagree with the policy, but this is a reality of it. So here is a list of Conservative, Liberal, NDP, Bloc Green, and PPC, the number of campaigns that they ran, and then the number that were below the 10%. So Conservatives had 2 below the 10%, Libs had 1. The NDP had 296 out of 342 that were below 10%, meaning they won't get the rebate, meaning I think the party is going to go bankrupt. I think the party is going to go bankrupt because if you know political campaigns, a lot of times, like he said, they take out bank loans. They're literally running their campaign on debt. in the hopes that the government is going to write them a big subsidy check afterwards. All they have to do is get 10% of the vote. The NDP just didn't accomplish it in 87% of the ridings that they ran in. They're not getting the money. Likewise, the the Green Party didn't make the threshold in 98% of the ridings that they ran. They only made it in 4 ridings, and the PPC in 100. So the PPC is not getting any money. The Bloc is only getting it for 4 ridings, and the NDP 87%. I predict that the party could go bankrupt. What do you think, Wyatt?
100%. They might have to sell the Leighton building because that's how they usually were funding their campaigns. You bring in a good chunk of donations, you put that up as like proof that you can fundraise to a bank, then you take out a massive few $1 million loan on the Jack Layton building in Ottawa, and then you run a bunch of candidates. And what I've heard from NDP insiders is it doesn't matter how that money was raised and spent, they just act like a kleptocracy after the election and steal all of the rebate checks that every single riding was given until they actually pay off the building, and then the local ridings can start to fundraise their own money again, knowing that they will have to pay back their rebate to the party at once the election is over. The thing with Jagmeet Singh too is that he probably didn't even benefit the Liberals against the Conservatives as much as he thought. The blue collar ridings that the NDP held, the Conservatives grabbed them. That's why they were winning so well in Windsor. It's not that those were NDP ridings before, but the whole point is that the NDP had a substantial vote there. Oftentimes, these are ridings where the Conservatives came in third, but they ended up grabbing up pretty much 100% of the NDP vote because the type of person voting NDP in that area is far more likely to go Conservative if the NDP pulls out and just puts up a paper candidate and barely tries. And then the other ridings that the NDP lost were in like downtown Vancouver, downtown Toronto, where you should be competing as hard as possible because this is a riding where it's either going to be Liberal or NDP. But Jagmeet Singh had managed this election so poorly that it's basically just because of the personality and character of some of their MPs that were able to hold on that got them through. So he ended up stripping out every single virtue for somebody on the left that the NDP held. And so now the party basically came in a distant fourth for what? The benefit of giving like Mark Carney a slightly bigger minority when they could have had those seats.
It's really interesting. I don't know what will happen with the party. They've got their work cut out for them, whether they do want to rebuild or whether they just want to fold and put their votes in with the Liberals, and then we'll have a real two-party system in Canada. But it's hard to imagine them recovering. I want to move on because we've got a few more names to get to here. So we talked about them quite a bit at the beginning of the show, but Maxime Bernier and the People's Party were losers, and the losing didn't stop for Maxime Bernier on election day. He came out afterwards on X and was just whining, and he sounded like a sore loser. I'm going to read what he had to say here on X. He said, "So in this election, the PPC lost roughly 700,000 of its 840,000 votes from 2021, 83%. That's not a flex, man. That's embarrassing. You got wiped out, and that's how you're responding." He writes, "I suspect the vast majority voted for the Conservatives, having to succumb to the don't split the vote. We must beat the Libs at this time hysteria." No, that's not true. I will admit, I voted for Maxime Bernier and the People's Party in 2021 as well, for the opposite reason probably that you did, Wyatt. I was living in Rosedale at the time, University of Rosedale, Christopher Freeland's riding, and the Conservatives had absolutely no hope. So my vote did not matter, and I figured I might as well do the principled vote. I liked Maxime Bernier better than Aaron O'Toole. I didn't want to reward the Conservatives for running a terrible left-wing campaign, so I voted for them. And this time around, I didn't succumb to the don't split the vote hysteria. I just put my vote back to the party where it usually is, because last time around it was a protest vote. Okay, I'll keep reading from Maxime Bernier. He says, "And yet that strategy failed. We still have another Liberal government, and Poilievre couldn't even win his own seat. That's fair. But the insane CPC trolls and the fake independent journalists and influencers paid by the CPC are still accusing the PPC of helping Carney." So all of a sudden, we're fake independent journalists. I have interviewed Maxime Bernier on my show half a dozen times or more. I've happily helped promote his cause through my platform. And then the second I'm critical of him and others, he calls us fake independent journalists and accuses influencers of being paid by the CBC. I don't see any influence of that. So to me, this is just poor form. And then he goes on to say that Poilievre dropped the ball and that the PPC is a better place to vote. This just comes across as very petty. And yes, just to rub it in a little bit more, the People's Party of Canada got 141,000 votes across the country in this election. That is fewer people than read my emails every single morning. That represents 0.7% of the population. And I'm sorry, Maxime Bernier, you didn't even come close in your own riding. You lost by a landslide. The Conservative candidate there got 60% of the vote. You got 5.8%. You only got 3,600 votes in your own riding. This isn't really a political party anymore. This is sort of just like a personality. Like Maxime Bernier should just become a podcaster or become a public intellectual and go back to leading the movement through ideas rather than through politics, because he didn't even try in his own writing. He could have done what Elizabeth May did, just put all of her resources into meeting people, getting to know everyone in the Beauce. I mean, he used to represent that riding. I don't understand why he just doesn't do better there. He needs to have a seat in Parliament if he wants to be a politician. Otherwise, I just don't understand what the whole point of it is. Wyatt, what are your thoughts?
Someone should go back and analyze, and I have analyzed that race from 2019 when he was trying to win re-election in Beauce, back when he was the incumbent. And the problem was that he only lost by 10% back then. I think that he was almost intentionally trying to lose, because he only lost by 10% in 2019. Basically never showed up, did no pre-canvassing before the election of his own riding, maybe was there for 4 or 5 days during the actual election in 2019, and he was off in rural Saskatchewan and Alberta and British Columbia getting votes in places where they were maybe going to get 3% or 5%. And Maxime Bernier then, in a race where, again, if he just flipped 5% of the Conservative vote to himself, it would be a tie ball game. And he, as like a French politician who was very much anti-immigration, could have easily gotten a lot of Bloc Québécois voters to probably swap over to vote for him if he was going to be an even stronger voice on that issue. I just don't think he really cares. I had him on my show in 2021 and never again, because he continues to lie about actually making a constitution for his party. That's the funny thing. He always goes after establishment parties for being very hierarchical at the same time that his party is effectively a dictatorship where, by the way, he frequently swaps in candidates for other people that he just happens to like better, even if a nomination went on in a PPC riding. So the man's a complete hypocrite when he has full power to be as principled as possible. The thing, too, is at least Maxime Bernier has proven that the American podcast circuit does not get you votes. One, the PPC for some reason couldn't get over 2/3 of the candidates on the ballot, but the man did a podcast tour with every single major conservative influencer in the US, and turns out it doesn't matter. Because it sounds shocking, but Canadians don't watch a lot of American political news. I know political Canadians will do that because they're interested in the US, but there was no way going on the Patrick Bet David podcast was going to help Pierre Poilievre. So thank you to Maxime Bernier for proving that nobody cares.
That's a really good point. Okay, I want to quickly go through my final losers. I'll just group them together. The final losers for me in this campaign were the legacy media, and shining in that was the CBC. They were just so offended and so hurt by the things that happened at the debate, and they couldn't hide it in their face. They just came across as so unprofessional, so petty. And I want to couple in with the legacy media's favorite pollsters and the poll aggregators, because they just got it wrong. They got the election wrong. I want to show you the 338 aggregate polls. So this is taking all the fancy legacy media polls that happened during the campaign on any given day and creating an aggregate list, so like kind of an average of them. And here is what they had the day before the election. Let me just pull it up here. They had the Liberals at 43%, Conservatives at 39%, NDP at 8%, Bloc at 6%. Okay, how did the election actually finish out? The Liberals at 43.7%. So okay, not terrible. 43 to 43.7. The Conservatives though at 41.3%. So they got them off by a full 2%, and they got the NDP off by 2% as well. So again, why would we ever trust legacy media? And why would we ever trust their pollsters again when they just got this one so wrong? What do you think, Wyatt?
And that's aggregating some of the good ones with the bad ones. The particularly bad ones were showing a 5 to 6% lead for the Liberals before Election Day. So some polling is actually pretty good. But the thing is, you have to be very selective with who you follow. There isn't just this, so you're denying the polls. If I look at an Ecos poll and it's saying a +8 Liberal victory, I'm saying that's not realistic. When I think it was some of the ones like Liaison Strategies and Research Co. towards the end, we're still saying +5, +6 Liberal. It's that would have been a wipeout. That would have been 210 seats. And that, but just because Abacus or Main Street did a better job does not then mean I'm going to be thinking, oh, the polling industry is great because if you average it, it's not that bad. The polling industry outside of a couple of firms still has a really bad problem under polling conservatives. And the thing is that you wonder how many people end up looking at it and saying, well, I'm not going to vote because the conservatives are losing by 6 or 7 points based on these 5 pollsters, and there's only 2 that are even saying it's somewhat close. Got to show up and vote, because if the turnout was higher than 70%, I think that would have actually carried the conservatives at least close to winning, and it only came in, I believe, at like 68.5%.
Yeah, well, that's totally the thing. I think that the purpose of the polls in many ways, Wyatt, was to demoralize conservatives, showing the Liberals with a huge lead, signaling to Canadians that the right thing to do was to vote Liberal, was to put your elbows up, fight against Trump, that whole ridiculous narrative that was constructed by the legacy media. And so they were trying to demoralize. I think that there was that sort of shy Tory effect where they just didn't want to tell pollsters the truth. And you're right. When you take away the small handful of good ones like Abacus and Main Street, which are at least not as biased as the other ones, the rest of the polls were even worse. Okay, folks may be wondering why we haven't talked about Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. Did we consider them a winner? Did we consider them a loser? We're going to do another segment where we're going to talk entirely about Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives and what we think they did right, what we think they did wrong. So you're going to have to stay tuned for that. All right, folks, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is the Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you and God bless.
You're watching Juno News, Canada's fastest growing independent news network. Our team works day and night to bring you nationwide coverage of the issues that matter. Honest reporting of the stories that put Canadians first. From far and wide, Juno is doing the work to turn the dial in the right direction, bringing you the news from the field and in the studio. Wherever it takes us, we get the job done. For you, for Canada. Subscribe today and help us replace the CBC. Go to junonews.com to join the fight.